Well, anyway, let's get back to, I've got one more question if you can handle it. Okay? One more? Okay? Good. Now, whether you've hit your kids or not, or whether you have kids or not, isn't so important. Well, it might be important to you, right? But not for this question. But if you had kids under those same circumstances, doing the same thing, how many of you would do the same thing to them that was done to you right now if you had choice about it? Nobody would do the same thing to them that was done to you? You wouldn't spank them or hit them or whip them in the same way? Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a question. If not, why not? I cheated. I asked two, didn't I? If it wasn't abusive to you, why wouldn't you do it to them? You can say, well, I know more. Knowledge isn't any correlation to abuse. A lot of people know things and they still do things. And I could be out in the parking lot, see, and you could drive over my foot. And then you come back and you drive over it again. Now, am I going to wait till I find out if you had driver's education, or were wearing your glasses, or had a cold, or you did it intentionally? And then if I found out that you didn't do it intentionally, I'm going to say, well, it doesn't hurt, don't worry about it, as the thing's crushed and broken and bleeding. Or am I going to be mad about it immediately and have a lot of pain about it immediately? Which is it? See, we have to have our feelings about it regardless of what. I might be a little more mad if it's intentional, but if it happened to us, it happened to us. And if it was abuse 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago or right now, it'd be still abuse. And I don't care if the consensus of the whole system is that, that you do beat kids. I don't care. I mean, I do care, but, that's not the issue. The issue is whether beating kids hurts them or helps them. And I maintain it hurts. And it has hurt for as long as we've been doing it. And it's hurt us. And you know that, see, because you wouldn't do it to them. You can see that, that would be abusive to them. And it's easier to see that it would be abusive and hurt them than it is to see that it was abusive and hurt you. I think we live in a whole nation where about 90% of the people in this nation have been physically abused. And I think that we've got maybe 3, 2, or 1% of us that are admitting it. That's a pretty shocking thing, isn't it? Imagine what impact that has on how we lead our lives and on how we parent our children. What gets denied gets acted out. Even if we don't want to hit them, we'll still find a way to project the anger onto them. And let's face it, we do that. Most of us in here have done that. Yes?
How does this correlate to pet abuse or animal?
High correlation. I'm talking about the same thing. That we kick.
You go home and kick your dog instead of beating your kid.
Or both. People that kick their dog will very often beat their kid. And if not physically, they'll physically kick the dog and emotionally beat the kid. Yes. Yes.
When do you believe that it is okay to hit a child?
When the child needs limitations, and at the point that their behavior is so far out that the only limitation they might sense and feel and get would be a physical consequence. And then I wouldn't call it a beating, but it'd be a spanking. And anybody get slapped in the face? How many of you? You're going to think I'm crazy at this point, but I've learned that a slap in the face is not just physical abuse, but sexual abuse. It's sexually shaming. It's like, first of all, how do we identify whether we have shame or not? A lot of it has to do with our face. Our society, if you don't look like Fonda or Redford, you start out with sexual shame, right? And Fonda or Redford don't think they look like Fonda or Redford, so they have it too. So then, no problem, really. But then, and that's what we, our attractiveness, our face, how it looks, we get concerned about that. And then the other thing is that your face is a sex organ. You use your face in sexuality, more than you use any other part of your sexuality or body, don't you? I mean, that's just a part of your sexuality. It's a sex organ. And so, if your parents came down and they pinched you in the breast or kicked you in the testicles, you'd call that sexual abuse, right? So slap in the face is also sexual abuse and sexually shaming and affects how we feel about ourselves and our sexuality. Any other questions? What do you do about it? Anybody want to know that? Nothing changes till it becomes real. Make it explicit. We won't have to pass it on when it becomes real. We can release ourselves from what's hidden. But we have to open it up. We have to have our feelings about it. We have to turn it back, and we have to deal with it really. We can't continue to protect. I'm not saying that you have to go home right today, call your parents and say, you know that time you spanked me, you SOB? You know what you were doing? No, I wouldn't recommend that. That's not what I'm talking about at all. The healing process is in us, and it's our feelings that need to go through the healing process. The whole process I'm talking about, I'll talk about forgiveness before some of you have to leave, okay? Really, I was doing this clinic, our clinics and workshops around the country. I was doing it for a year before I realized what we were doing. What we're doing is a forgiveness process. The first 3 days of it is anyway. I'm going to take you through the forgiveness process now, even before we talk about emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is talking for 9 hours. Right? Okay, sorry about that's physical abuse too, right? As you try and stand up. All right, taking you through this process of forgiveness. First of all, see it as an event. No, I mean not as an event, but as a process. Forgiveness is like a process, and sometimes, like processes, it has stages, and we bounce around in the stages. It doesn't go just like the book says. It's like grief. You ever notice that you bounce around in grief? You're in denial, then you're angry, then you're sad, then you're back in denial, and then you think it's all over, and then you're back in the whole thing again, right? Somewhere in the middle. That's grief process. Okay, forgiveness process is similar to that. And it's a series of stages, and the first stage in the forgiveness process is to recognize there was a wrong done to you. To not recognize the wrong is there's no possibility for forgiveness. We have to see that wrong for what it really was. Now, I recognize that I got hurt by my parents, right? So I went through this forgiveness process. But you know what happened? I recognized that I had hurt my son, but I was even set up to do that. And I had to go through the forgiveness process again. So I had to start all over with that piece. So it's, again, it's a recycling. Second stage is to recognize that we had feelings about the wrong. Do you know what we do? We cut ourselves off from those feelings. And we walk around with ulcers, a tight gut, constricted throat, a headache, pain in the back of our neck, a tight jaw, and we don't know that it's the feelings about what happened to us. We walk around, with a food compulsion, or about, 7 o'clock in the evening, we start eating, everything in sight that isn't, it's organic, and we don't know that it's about our feelings and how we've been wronged. We lose the connection between the feelings and what happened. And that's an automatic process for anybody that's gotten physically, sexually, emotionally abused. You lose the connection between the feelings of the abuse and the physical reaction or the hunger or the addictive reaction. So when you recognize you had feelings about the wrong, then that's a beginning. Yes, I do have anger, and maybe the anger is connected to my type. What we do in our society, is like we take Pepto-Bismol for the upset stomach, we take aspirin for the headache, and we get the jaw cut. Now they're cutting the jaw muscles so that people have a looser jaw. And we still don't have to muscle relaxation, so we still don't have to deal with the feeling. Right, just admitting is the next stage, that we have feelings about the wrong. The next stage is going down into embracing the feelings about the wrong. In our clinics, we take people through a process where they do embrace the feelings. We give them a whole day. And we call that process crucifixion. And it's based on a belief in something that we learned. What we learned is that everybody wants a new life. Everybody wants a resurrection. We go on diets, we make resolutions, we go to workshops, we want this new life. But how many of us are willing to look at the fact that we have to go through a crucifixion to have a resurrection? You have to. You have to embrace the pain. And you have to make it as big as it is, not as big as we want it to be or we think it is. And we've got to be in a process where we're allowed to do that. And that's what we give people. We give people a process that's internal and that's part family system and part group process and part education, but it's an internal process where you embrace your reality for a full 24 hours. And you stay with that pain. And it's hard, but it's so important because nothing changes till it becomes real. Now, after you've embraced that reality, something happens. One is that you learn what you need to do to have a new life, to have that resurrection. And part of that is that you got to learn to share the feelings with others. Sometimes it's preferable to share the feelings with the person that hurt you. Sometimes. Not always. But sometimes it's important to share at least in the direction of the person that hurt you. But to share the feelings with others is the key part of that. And that's what a lot of us don't know. We don't know the feelings ourselves, much less how to share them with others. But that's why we don't have relationships, because we don't know how to share our feelings. Remember I said love is the ability to share your reality, your emotional reality with another person. That's a key part of all relationships then. And it's a part of the forgiveness process. Now, once we share those feelings, and sometimes with the person, if that's appropriate, if they're not going to punish us by having a heart attack and dying the next day, or, if they're around and alive, or if we feel safe with doing that, or if they're not too fragile. You see, a lot of what we do with this, our parents are too fragile. I'm 25, my parents are 44, and they're too fragile to take it. And then you're 44 and you realize 44 ain't fragile at all. But you're 44 and they're 69, you think, oh, they're too old to deal with this stuff. Now you'll be 69 someday and you realize that, that parents, that's ageism to think that parents can't take it. That's like sexism and racism and what other ism that there is. Parents can take it. A lot of them refuse to take it. There are some that are too fragile. That'll, and some will punish you so bad for sharing it with you, it's a good idea not to anyway. The key is the sharing in the direction. Writing doesn't cut it. Writing is good for clarification. Writing isn't dealing with the feelings, okay? There's a lot of people that have you write this stuff out. I believe in that, but I don't believe that that's enough in and of itself. All right, so that stage is the sharing of the reality and the feelings with others, preferably with the people that hurt you in their direction. The next one is a decision of what you're going to do with the relationship. Now that decision can be, I'm gonna never see you again because it was so horribly abusive. Tortured with cigarettes, made to, eat feces in front of you. Stuff like that that's horrible, so abusive. Of course, you may never see that person again. Some of us can decide that we will have a relationship, but it'll have detachment. Sometimes we'll decide that we need a separation time so we can have the detachment. Okay, all of that is okay. It's just our decision of what we're going to do with the relationship, because the forgiveness process is a healing process, but it's our healing. It's not a patch job for a relationship. All right, the next stage is that you get a sense of acceptance and serenity about the wrong and about the relationship. Not that you don't have feelings about the wrong, it just doesn't control your life anymore and you don't self-destruct because you've been hurt. And not that you don't have feelings about the person, that hurt you, but that you still have a relationship where you have some detachment, that they can no longer control your life and who you are. And remember that some of that guilt that we feel is a product of the dysfunction. Example, let's say that, in a dysfunctional family, you're supposed to call a certain number of times and come home for, and that's part of the dysfunction. So, if you don't call, in a healthy family, when family members are doing what makes them happy, the whole family is, just fine with it. So it's like my son is in college, right? And he calls, and it's summer break, and he says, Dad, he says, I know it's summer break and you're expecting me to come home, but listen, I just got a chance to go with a friend who raises horses in Kentucky, and I really like to spend the summer on that ranch. And what am I going to say? What I need to say is, Dan, what I want for you is that you learn and that you be happy. And if you feel that this is an experience that you're going to learn and that you're going to enjoy, go for it. That's the forgiveness process. And it's important that we work with that, and it's also a therapeutic process. And I know that that's really what we're helping people do in our clinics, is go through that forgiveness. And it's a real healing kind of thing. It's also, I find it harder to do that. Like, it can be done in groups and other processes. Some people can go through it on their own without therapy. I'm not saying everybody needs to go through a clinic to do that forgiveness process. I want to talk about emotional abuse, too. Emotional abuse is not less than, it's not subtle. Emotional abuse is less specific than physical or sexual abuse. But the consequences of emotional abuse in our life is just as severe as any other kind of abuse. I think that, in fact, emotional abuse, is more of a setup for double binds. The emotional. There's more manic depressiveness, more suicidal reaction, more mental illness that comes out of emotionally abusive families than comes out of physical or sexual. I really, see that over and over again. And that emotional abuse is also not just a single thing, it's a whole myriad of things that can happen to us that are emotionally abusive. Double binds and double messages are a classic kind of emotional abuse. The double binds where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. I had my son in one for a while. I said, Dan, Get your anger out. Don't be passive aggressive, as if I didn't know where he learned that one, right? And you pout too much and you control everybody with your pouting. Get it out and say it. And then he'd say it, and I said, don't you talk around this house like that, So he clearly damned if he did, damned if he didn't. It's a double bind. One friend of mine had a nephew, and his nephew was sitting in a rocking chair going back and forth with the TV on and the radio on all day long, and that's all he did. And the development of this was that his parents used to be on him all the time from the time he was 15 to get a job, 7 years. And every time he'd get the paper to go out and get a job, they'd follow him, and they'd say, that's not a good job for you. That's a bad place to work. And then they'd tell him to get a job. And he couldn't move. He couldn't do anything but sit in that rocking chair, and that was it. I had a guy in a session, he says, Dad, is it okay if I talk about this? And Dad looked at him, and he said, of course it's okay if you talk about that. He went crazy, right in front of, it just spiraled into feeling nuts. Double messages, double binds, they hurt. There's a lot of other kinds of emotional abuse. There's sarcasm. Anybody ever live with sarcasm? Being picked on all the time, being criticized, put down all the time. It's emotionally abusive. Having your feelings denied, your right to express the feeling denied, or living with people that are denying theirs, and you become an emotional sponge for their feelings, and you take them on, or you act them out, that's emotional abuse. Having certain feelings denied, not others. Emotional abuse is, anybody ever go through comparisons? Always being compared to someone else? Okay, that's emotional abuse. What other? Can you think of anything else? Secrets in the family? Anything else?
One parent building you up, the other for
tearing you apart, yeah, splitting, making you battleground, mixed messages from each one. All right, now, there's one that didn't come up. It's called neglect. I knew this. I could get this stuff. Witness to violence and victim violence. I didn't have any problem with that. Sexual abuse, bonding, emotional incest. Okay, I can buy that. And someone says neglect. Hey, no, I wasn't neglected. Not me. I got into a fight when I was 17 years old. Now, in this fight, I didn't get into a lot of fights either. That one, somebody bumped someone else's pinball machine, and I came in to protect, and there I was again, caretaking and getting my tooth knocked out. Well, I didn't get knocked out. I got broken in the fight, right above there. So I went to a dentist. My first trip ever to the dentist, 17 years old. Dentist says, you have a tooth broken right up there. I says, thanks, dentist, and I left. And that was it. I lived with that broken tooth, just like it was crooked, for another 18 years. And it hurt periodically, but then I got into a rugby match. I got a forearm across, and I had a mouth guard on, but it still broke that one and the one next to it off. So I went back to the dentist, and he says, "Oh, you again?" No, actually, no, I had been there once or twice before, but anyway, I went back to this other dentist, and he looked in there, and he says, "My God," he says, "how could you have lived with that infection in your mouth?" I said, infection? What infection? He says, that thing has been infected and over-infected more often than anything I've ever seen. He says, you in scar tissue from the infections. I says, oh. He says, how could you live with that? And I looked at him and I says, I'm a rugby player. I figured that would explain it. It didn't. It didn't explain it at all. See, even rugby players don't like infection. They like blood, but not infection, right? So that didn't do it. How could I have lived with that? Well, you know what? I got one of those little flippers, those things that you stick in there and then it comes out real easy. I lost 4 or 5 of those, and it was a nuisance, and I hated it. But I lived with that for 4 years. I think it was 3 years anyway, just like that. And how could I have lived with the infection? How could I have lived with that stupid thing when I could have a crown built? How else? I was neglecting myself. Where did I learn to neglect myself? Well, then I even had to go back to look at the first trip to the dentist. It was dental neglect, wasn't it? Wouldn't you say? In fact, when I had dental records, I forged them or skipped school. I think someone bought me a toothbrush when I was a junior in high school. I didn't know about that kind of stuff. And flossing, God, I still can't stand even the thought of flossing. I did get a crown made for this. It's kind of nice, isn't it? They match the yellow perfectly and everything. But I never had a cavity. I'm going to write a book called Real Men Don't Get Cavities. So I was neglected. All right. Dental. Medical. I thought a family doctor was a doctor with a family. It didn't occur to me that people went to... I've probably gone to a doctor 2 or 3 times in my life. I just don't go to doctors. I know doctors and they're friends. I wouldn't want my daughter to marry one, but, that's, well... That's something about, anyway, something else. Being married to a doctor is like being single is what I've been hearing. Anyway, neglect. I started going back into it, and I started thinking, oh my God, okay, so it's medical, and it's dental, and then I started thinking of school, and I did well in school, but I didn't get any support for it, and I didn't get any help with it. You know what I thought, in fact? I thought when parents helped kids with homework, that was cheating. And you weren't supposed to help your kids with homework. They're supposed to do it themselves. That's what it is. Homework. You do it. So my kids would ask me for help, and I said, that's cheating. That's ridiculous. But, it just never occurred to me that parents could sit down and help kids with homework. I've done it. I've done it, more with my third than I ever did with my first. My third has a whole different approach to learning as well than my first. But see, that was neglect, academic neglect. My sister, or my brother, who did horrible in school, got the same support that I did, which was none. Then I started thinking about things like creativity, art, music, singing. I have no talent in any of that, and I don't do any of that stuff. But I know that I probably had the potential there for something in that area, and I probably still have it, and it's up to me if I want to do something with it. But the reality is it was neglected. Even lessons. Now, I lived in, we weren't economically real distressed or anything. We lived in a normal middle-class community. I never took a lesson in anything in my life. That's a lie, but, it's good to lie once in a while. People were all, if honesty were always rewarded, people would always be honest, right? But anyway, I did go to Vic Braden's tennis camp in Trabuco Canyon, and I loved it, but they gave up on me. They said, I've been doing it wrong for so long, I was fairly hopeless. So I don't really consider that a lesson. You know what I mean? And it's just, when you do something without learning how to do it right for so long, it's just ingrained. It's that dynamic homeostasis at work again. My tennis game is dynamic homeostasis, and that's the only dynamic that it is. Neglect, touch. I tucked my parents in. I don't ever remember being touched or tucked in. Neglect, affirmations, spiritual neglect. And then I thought, well, at least nutritional neglect. And then I remember my brother had rickets. My 12-year-old brother. Why do you get rickets? Nutritional neglect, deficiencies. He cured his own rickets. What he did was, he bought a lot of lettuce and vegetable soup and vitamin pills and a set of weights. And he became this little Hercules, from rickets to Hercules, in about 3 years of junior high school. And he was in 8th grade, and he could bench press 300 pounds and stuff. That's how he got that slate top pool table out of there. That's what he was working for. I want a pool table. I'm going to get rid of these rickets. Anyway, I don't think it was the master plan, but the rickets themselves, that reflects neglect as far as I'm concerned. I was eating the same stuff he was. And I know that a lot of my eating disorder is tied into neglect issues. I was a victim of massive neglect and never looking at it. In fact, I'm operating in a paradigm of neglect that I've never taken care of. And outside, I'm just learning now to step outside and learn that there's ways that people take care of themselves that I knew nothing about. And I think a lot of us are. In this country, that's what we die of. We neglect ourselves. We neglect our physical needs, our nutritional needs, our health needs, our touch needs, our relationship needs, our sexual needs. We neglect that stuff, and it's killing us. And when we looked at where we learned that system of neglect, we can start making some choices to move away from it. Any questions? Yes.
Recognize that's what they're doing and
notice. Always notice. And make it explicit what they're doing. What you said is right. The question is, what do you do when people project their feelings onto you? And what I'm saying is that you notice that that's what they're doing, and you set limits in yourself. And you set limits outside, which build your internal boundaries so that you don't take that on as much as you build boundaries. And learn who you are. And don't get so enmeshed in who other people are. But that is, again, I say it's a therapeutic process, but you can do it by just noticing that that's what they're doing, and immediately it lessens. So often I'll say the words, make it clear, make it overt, make it explicit, notice it. And then the idea is if we don't have boundaries, we'll still take it on. But we can learn to build boundaries, and boundaries are internal, and we learn to set them.